Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So in today's lesson, by the end of today's lesson, we will be able to identify the ethical aspect of human life, and the scope of ethical thinking. So we are now down to our second to the last lesson. Actually, this is the last one, the senses of the self, but the continuation for this one will be uploaded tomorrow. Yes. So, it is sometimes thought that one should not rely on any external authority to tell oneself what the standards of moral valuations are, but should instead turn inwards. So in this section, we are going to look into the three theories about ethics that center on the self. So those are the subjectivism, the psychological egoism, and the ethical egoism. So for today's, we're going to be talking the two theories, and those are the subjectivism and the psychological egoism. The ethical egoism will be uploaded tomorrow. So let's start with the first theory, and that is subjectivism. So the starting point of subjectivism is the recognition that the individual thinking person, which is the subject, is at the heart of all the moral valuations. Therefore, she is the one who is confronted with the situation and is burdened with the need to make a decision or a judgment. And from this point, subjectivism leaps to the more radical claim that the individuals is the sole determinant of what is morally good or bad and what is morally right or wrong. And a number of cliches familiar to us would echo this idea. No one can tell me what is right and wrong. No one knows my situation better than myself. I am entitled to my own opinion, which is the most famous one, the most popular one. A lot of people would say this, including myself. It is good if I say that it is good. So there is really something appealing about these statements, as you can see on your screens right now, because they seem to express a cherished sense of personal independence. But a close look at these statements may reveal problems, and in seeing these, we see the problems of subjectivism. So let us start with the first one. No one can tell me what is right and wrong. In a sense, there is some validity to this. No one can really compel another to accept a certain value, judgment, if she or he, or if she herself does not concur with it. However, we know that this statement cannot really be taken as absolute. Therefore, we realize in many instances that we had maintained an idea or an opinion that further discussion reveals it was actually erroneous. And we realize that we can be mistaken and that we can be corrected by others. So, why is this not also possibly applicable when we are speaking of ethics? How about the second one? No one knows my situation better than myself. Once again, in a sense, there is some validity to this because, yeah, only you knows your situation other than other people. So this particular person who is put who is put in a certain situation which calls for a decision, has knowledge of the factors that affect her situation and decision. But to take this fact as a ground for not listening to others is to have a mentality that imagines that one's own situation um, or concern is so personal and unique that there is no way other person can possibly understand her and give her any meaningful advice. But does not it make greater sense to recognize the reality that many human experiences are common and that others may have something useful to suggest? The third one, I am entitled to my own opinion. And as I said earlier, this is the most popular one since a lot of people have been using these statements, and including myself. So here, once again, this is also a valid point that is often misused. And certainly, each person has the right to believe what she believes and has the right to express this. But this right is often stubbornly misconstrued as some kind of immunity from criticism and correction. It is a bigoted racist has an opinion against anyone who is dark skinned, an anti-Semite, has an opinion against Jews, a misogynist has an opinion against women. And we realize that these opinions are highly problematic for a reason that there is really no basis for considering any of these groups of people as inferior. And we would rightly be indignant about an employer who pays his female employees less than the male employees simply because he is of the opinion that women are inferior to men. But isn't he entitled to his own opinion? So to insist on one's right in having opinions, whatever these happens to be, is to exhibit a close mindfulness that um, rightly invites censure from someone who is trying to think more critically about values. So the last one there. Oh, by the way, as a joiner on the third statement that I am entitled to my own opinion, if you are really a feminist, you would really somehow object to a statement that women are inferior to men. If you are on a feminist perspective. So on the fourth statement there, it is good if I say that it is good. With this line, we get to hear, we get to the heart of the problem with subjectivism. So this statement implies that it is my personal consideration of X as good that makes X good. Let us just label that one with X, okay? So X is good on the basis of my saying so. Now, the problem now becomes, what is my basis of for saying X is good? So this renders now subjectivism as an attainable view for someone who uses this fact as the very basis for the valuation. But when I as a subject, I'm asking what is wrong or what is right, what is good, or what is bad. With subjectivism, there is no other basis that I can look forward to. So the next theory is what we call the psychological egoism. So let us consider another cliche. It would go like, these human beings are naturally self-centered, so all our actions are already motivated by self-interests. So this is a stance taken by the psychological egoism, which is a theory that describes the underlying dynamic behind all human actions. As a descriptive theory, it does not really it does not direct to one to act in any particular way. Instead, it points out that there is already an underlying basis for how one's act. So the ego or self has its desire and interests, and all of our actions are geared toward satisfying these interests. Now, this may not seem particularly problematic when we consider many of the actions that we do on a day-to-day basis. Like I watch a movie, read book because I want to, or go for a walk and do some kind of a window shopping in the mall because I enjoy that. And I take a certain course in college because I think it will definitely benefit me, or I will join an organization because I will probably get some good out of it. Like we do things in pursuit of our own self-interests all the time. But what really other types of behavior that we would commonly say are directed towards the other? Um, Consider, for example, an act of generosity in which someone helps a friend with their thesis, perhaps. So rather than play video games, or someone makes use of her free um, free time, perhaps on a Saturday. So helping, excuse me, helping build a house for Gawad Kalinga. So in the psychological egoist's perspective, this would maintain that underlying such apparently and other directed behavior is a self-serving desire, even if one does not really acknowledge it or is even conscious of it. So perhaps he only helped his friend with her thesis, perhaps, and because he is trying to impress her, so there is like another motive for helping, or she helps out with the Gawad Kalinga because this is how she relieves this her sense of guilt for being well off compared to others. So the idea is that whether or not the person admits if one's actions are ultimately always motivated by self-serving desire. So this theory, the psychological egoism, it has actually a couple of strong points. So first off, the simplicity. So when an idea is marked by simplicity, it has a unique appeal to it. So a theory that conveniently identifies a single basis will definitely somehow account for all actions, is a good example for this. The second strong point here is the plausibility. It is plausible that self-interest is behind a person's actions. It is clearly the motivation behind many of the actions one perform, which are obviously self-serving, and it could very well also be the motivation behind an individual's seemingly other directed actions. It is not only plausible, but also irrefutable. When we say irrefutable, it's somehow impossible. So Psychological egoism is an irrefutable theory, impossible theory, because there is really no way to try to answer it, because being confronted by the challenges that whatever one might say, there is the self-serving motive at the root of everything. So the psychological egoists can and will insist on his stand no matter how one might try to object. So this opens up two questions. So first, because we cannot refute, shall we accept it as true? The second question, do we accept the consequences of this theory? Now let's focus our attention on the first question. So the first question asks whether we have to accept the theory because it happens to be irrefutable. Let us consider this analogy and let's use A and B. So A points that B has an oedipal complex. And according to A, this translates into a desire in B to get rid of the father figure. Then A insists that everything about B and everything what B does is his choice in music, his choice, of course, of favorite food, is ultimately rooted in this complex. So therefore, no matter what B says, A would be able to insist that even without his acknowledging it deep down, it is this complex that drives him to act the way he does. So in this scenario, A claims is irrefutable, but does not B have to accept it? And similarly, one could maintain if he really wanted to. So that human nature is intrinsically self-interested and that human being could not possibly be benevolent. So when they seem to be so, it is only a matter of pretense. So one could maintain, but does one have to? So the second question there, for a while. So the second point there, so what's the question again for the second point? So it has to do with the problematic consequences of this theory. Consider the scenario. um, for example, one woman spent her money on expensive clothes and another woman donates to charity. So in terms of psychological egoism, they are both simply and equally doing what is self-serving for themselves. So because they both are simply fulfilling what would serve them, they are of equal moral worth. So in judging these persons and these actions, we can actually ask ourselves, do we want to give up on moral intuition concerning the goodness and value of generosity versus the wrongness of selfishness just for the sake of this theory? And most significantly, turning to the next consequence, when we move from the moral judgment to moral decision, the question is, how then are we supposed to decide? So given the psychological egoism, it does not matter. We only think that we have a choice, but actually, whatever way that we end up acting, our minds have actually already determined what serves our interest best. So to sum up everything, psychological egoism, when we look at its consequences, it actually leads us to a cynical view of humanity, to a gloomy description of human nature, and finally to a useless theory for someone who is concerned with asking herself what is right thing to do. So this is because it ends up in nullifying the possibility of any normative ethics in its view of already determined human being. So that ends for today's lesson. The continuation for this one will be uploaded tomorrow. Thank you and God bless.